Now we're going to be talking about the nitrogen cycle. So, just like in the carbon cycle, you can think of everything just starting up in the air. So we have nitrogen in the air. Now, what is the forms of nitrogen is it's got to be in a certain form that you can use. Just N2 by itself isn't used by many plants, or sorry, it's not used by like animals and whatnot. But what happens is you have normal nitrogen and it's bacteria. So you have some bacteria here. You have really tiny bacteria here in the water. And we'll leave the factories for now. But basically those two sources are where it starts. So you have little tiny things in the water, little tiny things in the soil, bacteria, and they take nitrogen and they turn it into different forms. So here's some examples of the different forms of nitrogen. You have ammonia, you have ammonium, which is NH3, I think, and then NH4, and then you have your nitrates, which are have a different ion to them. So yeah, it starts there. Okay, bacterias are doing stuff to the nitrogen to make larger animals, make it usable to larger animals. So it starts with bacteria. And then the bacteria go and they do a whole bunch of stuff. There's a whole bunch of other bacteria that change nitrogen to different forms, changing it to different forms, etc. But the basic thing to think about is once it goes through the bacteria, like we'll talk terrestrial. There's two terms to remember with when we're talking about nitrogen is you have your terrestrial ecosystem and you have your aquatic ecosystem. Okay, what are the two types? Terrestrial, aquatic. Terrestrial meaning like on the earth, like ET, extraterrestrial. Terrestrial on earth, extraterrestrial being like not from the earth, hence ET. And then aquatic ecosystem. So terrestrial bacteria, aquatic bacteria. So they'll break it down and it'll be turned into different forms that plants can use, and those plants will be eaten by rabbits and other animals, obviously. And if you're not a vegetarian, you'd maybe eat a rabbit, or eat something that eats rabbits, or eat something that plants use the rabbits fertilizer to. Anyways, basically that's like a little cycle here. Okay, so it comes down via these bacteria here. Oops. Via these bacteria here, and then this can go around in a little circle. So these bacteria turn into NO3, and then it comes up, and then to NH4, and then NO3, NH4. Okay, so don't get really confused by this diagram. You won't need to know everything. You just need to know that there's little mini cycles that exist. Okay. So you have one little mini cycle here for nitrogen. Okay, and then the same thing with the water. So you have nitrogen that this bacteria uses. This bacteria is like this one here. And then plants take it, and then you have a little cycle over here. Okay, so you have a cycle here, you have a little cycle here. Some of this bacteria that are in the water don't get eaten by the plants. They die and they fall to the bottom of the ocean, or bottom of the sea, or bottom of the lake. Maybe not lake, but yeah, they fall to the bottom. Then we'll get to what happens when they fall to the bottom. Some of this stuff also just makes its way to the bottom. All right, so there's a little terrestrial cycle. There's an aquatic cycle of nitrogen, and they start with bacteria, and then plants and fish, and plants and animals. Okay? And then the other way that nitrogen is used, the same sort of, I guess, way that bacteria can turn nitrogen into a different form from the air that plants and stuff use, factories sort of do that same process. So they'll take nitrogen, they'll use something called nitrogen fixing, and they'll make fertilizer. And what's fertilizer used for? Growing plants. So you can see sort of the similarities here. The bacteria make the plants. Here the factory makes it for plants. Okay? Meanwhile, these plants have also got some of their nitrogen from this cycle here. This bit here is the same as this bit here, so don't let that confuse you. So plants can get their nitrogen partially from a factory's fertilizer and then partially from that normal process that was happening here, the terrestrial process. And that same sort of thing can occur. And there's like runoff from fertilizer or from whatever, and that's another way that it can get into the water and then used by plants. Okay, so it's just showing that everything is sort of connected. Okay, so with the nitrogen cycle, two main cycles to worry about. One, terrestrial, two, aquatic. Nitrogen, there's two, terrestrial, aquatic. They both start with a form of bacteria. Okay, bacteria to plants to animals. Bacteria to plants to animals. Okay, so what happens to the nitrogen that's not used by plants or not used by the animals? It can fall down to the very depths of the earth or whatnot, and slowly after a really long time it can be blown out through a volcano. That's the way it can make it back into the atmosphere. And also one thing interesting to keep in mind is lightning also can take the nitrogen that's already in the air and turn it to NO3. Okay? So, and then like the ash and whatever, that can like run off into the water too. So they're just showing how everything is connected. Nitrogen cycle, nitrogen in the atmosphere, bacteria, terrestrial, water bacteria, aqua cycle, factories, fertilizer, volcanoes, lightning. Okay? But again, the two things, one being terrestrial, two being aquatic. Okay? That'll get you a lot of marks if you remember those two, and that should be good.